Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We apologize for the technological issue. We're grateful that you got the backup link. We're going to give other guests a few more moments to arrive to get that second link, and then we'll get started today. Thank you for being here. I'll give you a little bit of background information about our events. This event, FSU Music Book Club, is a new initiative. It is a free virtual opportunity for all of our friends and alumni and faculty to come together, no matter where you currently live, and get to experience the FSU music community again. We tend to feature books written by our faculty and our alumni, and today we'll be featuring a book by Michael Bakan. And so, if you are curious about maybe getting involved with this event, if you have a publication yourself, or if you know of someone who's published a work, please feel free to reach out to me and we'll consider it for future events. But today, we are very excited to have Dr. Michael Bakan, Dr. Elizabeth Fein, and Dr. Carrie Danielson here with us today to talk about music and autism, speaking for ourselves. My name is Rebecca Harris Stewart. I'm the Assistant Director of Student and Alumni Engagement for the College of Music at FSU. And if you need anything from Alumni Services, just reach out to me. I'll drop my name in the chat. And it looks like we've got a good number of people signed in. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Danielson to get us going for our session today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you for organizing this. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So nice to have you here virtually. My name is Dr. Carrie Danielson. I am an assistant professor of musicology in community music here at Florida State University. I am also an alum of the master's and PhD program in musicology here. So hello, fellow alumni. Was also a student of Dr. Michael Bakan and his graduate assistant as he was doing this project. So I've been asked to moderate this event today as someone who has worked with Dr. Bakan in the past, and also as another musicologist, ethnographer, someone who's interested in music making and sometimes unmaking community in different ways. So I'm going to have each of our other panelists go ahead and introduce themselves, who they are, what they work on, and such. So I'm going to start with Dr. Elizabeth Fein, who's chair of psychology, associate professor at Duquesne University, who's joining us. Dr. Fein, if you wouldn't mind giving us a few words about who you are and your relationship to this topic, that would be great.
Sure. As Carrie mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Fein. I'm associate professor and chair in the Department of Psychology at Duquesne University, a program that has a PhD program in clinical psychology. We train psychotherapists from a model that foregrounds psychology as a human science. What is it that is distinctly human about our endeavor as psychologists? And so, what that means in practice is we do a lot of qualitative research, we do a lot of interdisciplinary research, we collaborate really closely with other departments in the humanities like philosophy and in the social sciences like anthropology. So, my background is also interdisciplinary. I trained at the Department of Comparative Human Development at University of Chicago, where I trained kind of at the intersection of clinical psychology and anthropology. I think of myself as a psychological anthropologist as well as a clinical psychologist. And my interest in this topic really kind of arose in a way out of that. I've always been fascinated by the intersection of the differences in our minds, the way that we perceive and make sense of the world, and the way that that interacts with culture, and culture of all kinds, culture in terms of, our beliefs, our values, our traditions, but also culture in terms of what we create, the music we make, the stories we tell, the pictures we draw. Autism is such a rich place to study that because autistic people often make such active use of culture and are so radically innovative in their transformation of cultural materials. So I met Michael Bakan years ago at the Society for Psychological Anthropology conference. We were just talking about that a bit. and we connected over an interest in autism and ethnography. Um, but I also come from a musical background. My parents are both classical musicians. My sister's a classical musician. My uncle is a classical musician. I am not myself a classical musician, but I do sing in a darkwave band. And I DJ a bit. So music has always been a big part of my life as well. So it's just really exciting to be in dialogue with Michael and his interlocutors around music and autism and creative life and creative work. And so, yeah, I'm excited to continue that conversation with all of you today.
You, and we're really happy that you're here and have so many insights that you can offer. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Bakan in a second, but before I do, I think it's also good if you have some time to put into the chat what brought you to our talk today. If you have an interest in this topic, if you have a personal relationship, we'd love to hear about that as we move forward. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague and mentor, Dr. Michael Bakan, who, as you know, has written this book. This is the older version of the book, Music and Autism. Some of us have the original copies of that. And he is going to introduce himself a little bit, who he is, and also why did you write this book? Why music and autism? Why an ethnomusicology of autism?
So thank you. Thank you to Rebecca for organizing this wonderful opportunity to share some ideas and some work. Thank you to Carrie and Elizabeth for being here and joining me and taking some time out of their busy schedules to do this. I really appreciate it. And thank you to the College of Music for hosting this series. So it was by no means my intention to become an ethnomusicologist of autism. By the time that happened, I was already a mid-career academic on the cusp of tenure and things like that, teaching here at Florida State University. My earlier career had mainly been dedicated to research on gamelan music in Indonesia, on the island of Bali. I'd written a book about that. And then autism came into my life unexpectedly in the context of a member of my family. And then there was a sort of a cathartic experience, a spontaneous drumming jam session that was initially just between myself and my, at that time, new colleague, Dr. Benjamin Cohen, who was one of the instigators of this project with me as well. Anyway, he had just arrived in Tallahassee. He and his family came over for dinner. We had been looking forward to drumming together after the dinner. We were doing that, and then this kid who was at the party comes out and joins us and starts playing. And it was quite unexpected. And this was a kid who had been diagnosed on the spectrum, about 3 years old at the time. And it turned into this kind of transformative, almost magical experience. And within minutes, this kid was sort of directing the flow of the improvisation. He was singing, and it was quite unexpected and quite amazing. And it just kind of flipped my head around in a whole bunch of different ways. And I spent a fever dream night kind of envisioning, well, what can I do with all of this? And the results of that was a call early in the morning to wake up Ben Cohen and say, who was a medical ethnomusicologist, and say, is there something we can do together with all of this? And so out of that, long story short, was born a project called the Music Play Project, which ran from about 2005 to 2009, resulted in a series of publications. That in turn led to some interest from the National Endowment for the Arts, who approached me about a possible grant program to do an improvisatory ensemble with autistic children and their family members and professional musicians from all over the world. That became the Autism Ensemble, which ran from 2011 to 2013. And then that led in some circuitous and unexpected ways to the project that we're talking about today, which is the Music and Autism Speaking for Ourselves book. And the sort of the catalytic moment, I guess, for that was this realization in a particular conversation with one of my interlocutors, Mara Chaser, who's the co-author of Chapter 2, that I didn't want to write about people with autism and their musical interests, I wanted to write with them. And from that came the book, and onward from there, there have been some other things that have happened since that time as well, but I'll cut it off there to give us some time for conversation.
Well, thank you. So one of the things that you've alluded to and have mentioned is sort of the not wanting to sort of represent or present autism, but maybe represent in the way you do this. And this is something that we do, as all of us on this panel do, as ethnographers. So I wanted to bring Elizabeth into this conversation too, to talk about what is it that we do when we sort of approach a project like this or write a book like this, and what are our goals? What does ethnography give us? What does it help us understand, particularly about music and autism, autism more generally? Elizabeth or Michael, either of you can take that question, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that before we dive into some of the specifics of the book.
Elizabeth, you wanna take a shot at that?
Sure. I mean, as a psychologist, I feel like so many of the things that I'm curious about, so many of the kind of psychological phenomena that I'm curious about, whether that's autism, whether that's emotion, whether that's cognition, it happens in a world, in a lived world. And in some ways it happens through that lived world. Anytime, you think about memory, anytime that we are remembering something. There's some aspect of the world that has become part of ourselves and part of our psychological life. So for me, ethnography is a way of getting close to that and really honoring that lived and worlded dimension of experience. And it really helps to get close to the texture of experience in some way, just really what it feels like to be someone and to be somewhere, what that is like, not to move to the book too early, but one of the things that I love about the book and these conversations is the closeness that you can get to the just I keep using this word texture, but it is almost like the cloth out of which music and musical experience is woven. To hear, Graham talk about how he perceives different traditions of world music, or to hear Gordon Peterson talk about how he experiences time and how that plays into his musicality. Those are the kinds of conversations that I think you can only have with people who on some level have a sense that you are living alongside them. You can never live their lives. You can never really walk in someone else's shoes, but you can kind of walk down the same street they're walking on, metaphorically or actually, and kind of look around with them about what's happening. And so for me, ethnographic work has always been really, really central to any kind of psychological inquiry. And it certainly seems to make a lot of sense for the study of music as well.
Michael, I'd like to hear you talk about this. And I also want to maybe introduce the question of how is this different than music therapy when you bring this in? I know this is something that we've talked about quite a bit. But what sort of value does sort of this representing of conversations, this ethnographic approach offer in that sense? And how does ethnomusicology sort of differ from these other spheres that people might be more familiar with in some cases?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's a big question, and one that I'm going to try to answer with concision because of our time constraints here. But the first thing that I would say is that the approach, or the many approaches within the field of music therapy, I regard as complementary to what I do essentially as a musical ethnographer of autism and neurodiversity. The way that I have categorized the difference is that essentially we are the products of our disciplines and the professional expectations related to those disciplines. If you are a music therapist, you are by definition a therapist. In order to be a therapist, you are working with people who have come to you or who've been brought to you because there's some kind of an identified issue, condition, problem that is in need of address. And so it makes perfect sense then that you would say, okay, well, if that's the issue that we're trying to address, what kind of interventions, what we apply, what kind of methods, what we use. So that's what music therapists do. Now they do a lot of other things as well, and a lot of the things that music therapists do overlap a lot with what ethnographers do, but fundamentally that is the job description. As an ethnomusicologist, my job description is different. I'm not engaging with people with the premise that there's some kind of a problem to be solved here, some kind of an issue to be addressed. My sole responsibility is to try to understand these people from their own perspectives. And as I talk about in the book, to engage with the people with whom I collaborate as the world's leading experts at being who they are. And so whether I'm working with, master Balinese gamelan musicians in Indonesia, or whether I'm working with, a group of kids in the EWOMP, or the Exploratory World Music Playground, who are on the autism spectrum, once I enter that space, that is the positionality that I have. I am learning from them. I am trying to understand where they're coming from. I'm trying to meet them where they are. And I'm trying to respect them and honor them as the world's leading experts at being who they are. And so that's, whether it's in musical interaction, in conversation, in co-authorship, that's basically the philosophy that guides what I do. And so just as a quick kind of example of the difference, if I were to go to Bali, to the island of Bali in Indonesia, where they have this incredible gamelan traditions. It's sort of a percussion orchestra, for those of you who are not familiar with that. Very virtuosic, highly organized, hundreds of years of development. Well, they tune their instruments entirely differently from the way we do. They have a different scale. There are multiple versions of the same pitches. They don't have a conductor. They have a large orchestra with no conductor that's led by a pair of drummers. There are a lot of things that are done in different ways. But as an ethnomusicologist, I would never presume to go in and say, we should really bring in, Dr. Yo, the master piano tuner here from Florida State, and have him, fix up your instruments, get them at A440. We would never presume to say, the drummer's good there, but I mean, why make him conduct and drum at the same time? Why don't you get somebody up there to give him a baton and let him wave it around, and that'll help, and then the drummer can focus on drumming. To do so would be essentially ethnomusicological heresy. We would never do that. Though, of course, in our deep dark past, similar kinds of things were done by missionaries, but we won't go there. So this is basically the difference. And it was very interesting when I started getting into this work, and people would ask me about my Balinese research, and I would say, well, this and that, and say, oh, well, what's going on in the culture, and how is expertise defined, and what are the kind of ways that people develop repertoire and the context in which they perform? Whereas I would say I'm working with autistic people, they say, well, what measures are you doing? What deficits are you addressing? What interventions are being applied? And it was like genuine kind of confusion, but I'm doing the same thing. I'm working ethnographically. So to me, my job is to try to understand people, meet them where they are, understand them on their own terms as much as possible, participate and co-participate in their worlds. Hopefully that creates some kind of a rapport. Well, then maybe there can be some kind of a conversation where then the person says, I really enjoy doing this, and I'm fine with walking on my tiptoes, but I wish I could do better at making eye contact. Well, maybe there's something that a therapist or a music therapist could do to help with that. We've sort of opened that door. And so that's where I see, and I'm very excited right now because we have a fantastic music therapy program here at Florida State, and increasingly we're drawing interdisciplinary connections. I have several music therapy graduate students in the music and neurodiversity graduate course that I'm teaching right now, and who are doing wonderful work, and we're really seeing the possibilities of this kind of synergy develop.
Yeah, I echo those sentiments. Our faculty are just fantastic. And I really like sort of how we're coalescing around these questions of lived experience, texture, meeting people where they are. So I want to transition a little bit, and Elizabeth, you started to bring us there, about some of the content of the book itself. So I'm curious how many people in the chat have had the opportunity to read the book. If not, I think we could still be part of the conversation regardless. But if you have, are there any sort of favorite moments or highlights that you want us to think about or share, and we'll have some time later. And I'm going to ask the same thing of you, Elizabeth and Michael, to think about some highlights. I know we've talked a little bit about Gordon's chapter, so we can go there if we want. We can go to any of the other chapters. I'll let you guys decide.
Yeah, I mean, we know I'm a big fan of the Gordon chapter.
Me too.
Yeah.
And
And
of Gordon.
yeah, and again, just for I think it really highlights the ways in which autism as a category or as a concept can, as you know, we've kind of pointed at, hinted to, be somewhat alienating. You know, it can call our attention to pathologies and problems in a way that can sometimes keep us from seeing the kind of full picture of people's experiences. But it can also really lead us to some very interesting questions about how different people experience the world in different ways. And so for me, the way that Gordon talks about, for example, his relationship to social normativity, and that he almost feels like there are two people inside
Has
him
to
at
be me, and
least.
yeah.
Yeah.
Ascot and Norm, he calls them, right?
Yeah, Ascot and Norm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that, that's just really interesting to me in terms of like his relationship to creativity as well. That like sometimes it feels like creativity dwells a little bit more within Ascot, but then Norm is also the one who is able to provide some comfort in despair, be
Yep.
able to say like the world will continue and things will get better when you're feeling, kind of hang in there.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know, there's something about that chapter that just gives such a vivid picture of what it's like for him to make his way through the world. And you do such a wonderful job in this book, Michael, of sort of describing how you came to these understandings with people. But I would be curious to hear more about what it was like to work with him and to kind of collaboratively create this portrait of experience.
Yeah, well, the first thing is Gordon is, there's no other way of saying it, that he's a genius. He's one of the more brilliant people I've ever encountered. And there are others in the book as well, Donald and Ibby. And so, but in
Yeah.
any case, he's an intellectual genius. He's a musical genius. And he has this remarkable ability to articulate that dialectical relationship that's going on between these multidimensional components of his self and how those then sort of engage with the broader world. I think, just for those who haven't read the book or who aren't familiar with what we're talking about, so Ascot and Norm are these sort of these alter egos of Gordon. And Ascot is his sort of Asperger, as he puts it, self, is his autism spectrum-y self, who's mercurial and creative, but has difficulties with executive function and suddenly gets sort of blindsided when people who are really, adoring him and embracing him and bringing him to the world suddenly just shut him out and exclude him. And Norm is the one who's able to kind of rein in when things get out of control, when emotions get dysregulated, when the world just becomes too overwhelming to understand. And then music becomes this interesting point of mediation for negotiating this internal, sometimes collegial, sometimes antagonistic relationship between Ascot and Norm. And so, to put it in Gordon's terms, music on the one hand is his superpower, and it's the most direct access that Ascot has to, in a sort of a really unfiltered and joyful, celebratory way, just embracing all of the myriad creative dimensions of his selfhood. but then norm has to be there as well, because otherwise there's nowhere for Ascot to kind of place all of this. There's nowhere for Ascot to deal with it when suddenly something doesn't go right and someone rejects, what he's done. And so you see the music becoming this place where all of these negotiations are happening, being contested, being resolved, and quite honestly just being expressed, because this is one of the beautiful things for any of us who do music. We don't have to resolve the tensions. We don't have to resolve the contradictions. Music is a place where the mutuality of the tensions and the contradictions and the ambiguities and the ambivalence can exist simultaneously. And I think for someone like Gordon, who's having to maybe struggle a little bit more than some other people to kind of find his way within the world, the solace and the refuge of that musical place is really remarkable. And then the other part about Gordon's kind of imaginative world is, on the one hand, yes, he's a composer, he's a performer. But on the other hand, he's a musicologist and a specialist in early music, medieval Renaissance music, things like that. And so he, you might remember the section of the book where he talks about the squishy, wishy, timey-wimey stuff, where he's able to sort of go back in this ribbon of time through his memory. But it's not just his memory, where he's actually able to see and feel and taste and touch and smell these other times, to some place in Renaissance Italy, and he's able to kind of enter this portal into that room where all the instruments are there and the music is being played, and he smells the roast pig and whatever else is going on. And so there's this sort of intersection between that intellectual creativity, that historically informed consciousness, and the musical expressivity, all of which is happening in the context of his artistic life, but all of which is also both helping and complicating him to sort of engage with the world outside himself.
That's really fantastic. And I agree, sort of the richness you bring in with these conversations, using Google Hangout as a methodology is kind of brilliant in some ways. Jordan in the chat really loved Ibby's chapter and the sort of thinking and music thing, which we can talk more about. But I think one of the really big takeaways from your book is that we learn not only about sort of autism in all the ways that it intersects with music and all the way these people do, but also we sort of expand our understanding of what music is and what it does through these conversations. So before we sort of move into the Q&A, I would ask if there's anything that you want people to take away from this book and from this project, really, what would that be?
Listen. If I have to put it in one word, listen. I'm gonna resist sort of going too far into the deeper recesses of where my mind is at right now and the times in which we're living. But if there's, it's very easy to develop assumptions about people, about particular kind of conditions and how they affect people, to make assumptions about how people in the world who are living in those ways might affect us. And unfortunately, too often to do so with a fear of the unfamiliar, a fear of the unknown. But what this project has taught me, and what I hope other people who encounter it in one way or another come away from it with, is that we're all incredibly different. Whether we're different because we speak different languages, because we look different, because we like or love different people, whatever the case may be, but also because we're all neurocognitively different. I mean, nobody's really neurotypical, right? Neurodiversity is all of us. But like with anything else, there are certain kind of lines and threshold that define levels of difference as categorically something that is identifiable and which we would conceptualize in a different way. But to me, to paraphrase from my friend and one of the great scholars in this area, the autistic critical theorist Nick Walker, It's just a different operating system, you know. You use Mac, I use PC. It's like they both work, they're both good. They have, some areas that are readily compatible, some where you got to work a little bit harder to make compatibility happen, but they're certainly, mutually compatible if we make a little bit of effort. And I think there's just been too much of a tendency to just take the convenient, easy out and say, well, we're the normal people and these are the not normal people, and therefore they should sort of come over to our way of being. But that doesn't really help anyone. And it causes a lot of misery. And quite honestly, it also causes the society to suffer because the gifts and attributes that people who think differently can bring, as we know, are extremely important. So, rather than trying to start from saying, oh, this is an autistic person, I would recommend humbly start from the perspective that this is a person. And, rather than thinking that we kind of know that because this person has this condition or whatever else, that therefore this would happen and we should do this kind of intervention, or they should figure out a way that they can be more us. Why don't we just start with a conversation? Why don't we start with trying to understand? And so this is, it is kind of ironic that through the first couple decades of my career, well, I mean, at least the first decade of my career, I was hell bent on taking down the edifice of ethnography and sort of poking holes in it and all of its, exposing all of its faults. And then with this work, suddenly I became the champion of ethnography because I was dealing with a different set of discourses and challenges around that. But if we take ethnography, ethnomusicology, anthropology, psychological anthropology, if we take these fields, down to their Schenkerian reductions, to their root forms, they ultimately take the position that our job is to understand other people, what they care about, what they like, what they don't, what is meaningful to them, in the terms that they express it, and then to figure out a way to kind of mediate between those interactions and a larger world where we can help to kind of pave the way toward more comprehensibility, more reciprocity. And it all starts with listening. And I would venture to say, this is not everyone here is a musician, but it is a kind of a College of Music organized event. If there's any group of people who should be well qualified for the work, it should be musicians, because our whole lives are basically premised on developing skills of listening. So all we need to do is transfer those value systems and those skills to how we engage with people out there in the wider world, whatever they look like, sound like, however they're, cognitively wired. And hopefully we can do some good to make forward progress and to undo a lot of the tremendous amount of harm that has been done to people who have been marginalized and oppressed historically, and who unfortunately seem to be facing a new wave of that in many sectors in our society, added to which there has been a new and particularly insidious layer of vilification, which is completely uncalled for.
If I could just kind of jump on or add on to that, I think it's part of the tremendous admiration that I have for you, Michael, and for others who are doing this work is in recognition of what a heavy lift it can be. Sometimes it is a joy and easy to sit with somebody and attend to them as they are sharing their experience with you. But there are other times, when it is tremendously difficult for autistic people, for their family members, for their collaborators and interlocutors and people who are working together to try to get tasks achieved in the world, and in a world that is not well made for all kinds of minds. This is just such a robust and constant reality that we all deal with in so many ways. I'm thinking about the sort of Mac versus PC comparison that, on one hand, that can be used, and I've often heard it used to sort of talk about a sort of a value neutral difference, And at the same time, as someone who's a dedicated Mac user, if you've ever had to run a program that only runs on PCs on a Mac, it is can be a tremendous hardship. And so, just want to make sure to share my appreciation for all of those who do that sometimes very challenging, although often also very gratifying work.
Well, I appreciate that, and of course the feeling is mutual. I think that's how we kind of connected with each other in the first place, going back to, I think it was 2012, and
Yeah.
I was going out to present at the Society for Psychological Anthropology and was just going through all the abstracts, and I read this. I didn't know who this person Elizabeth Fein was. She was a graduate student at the University of Chicago, and I'm like, wait, this, like, I could have written this. It's like, it was like, kind of a doppelganger moment, and I know you've done the hard work, and likewise, Carrie, I'm of course so very, very proud of you, and admirer of the incredible, humanitarian work that you do in community music and working with refugee populations and all of these things. Just to sort of add on to or respond to Elizabeth's comment about the difficulty. Again, I don't want to go deep into this, but just in the past several weeks, I'm in touch with, and I'm hearing from, and I'm hearing about a lot of people who are autistic, who are neurodivergent, who are, in my direct or indirect circles, who are really suffering, who are really being harmed, who are really being hurt. And so, it's weird when when you're involved in the co-creation of a work like this book. It's, sort of goes out into the world, 2018 initially, then again in a different way in 2021. And, there you sort of follow these waves and of response. And it does seem that just fairly recently, there seems to be an uptick in interest in Elizabeth, I suspect, probably similarly for you, and in some of the work in the books and things like that. Which on the one hand is a good thing, but on the other hand, I think is an indicator that people are really looking for answers for what the heck to do in a world that, for the last 40 years, at least since Lorna Wing and sort of the identification of the autism spectrum, and then a few years later, Singer and the whole idea of neurodiversity, and then Steve Silberman and Nick Walker and Ibby Grace, and on and on and on, Amy Sequenzia, and the kinds of advances that have been made in changing the conversation and changing the reality of what it is like and what it means and how it is to live autistic in a world that isn't designed for you, and to see this kind of incremental, imperfect but somewhat steady progress suddenly really coming under very serious attack is disturbing. And it's disturbing for me, but I can kind of step aside from it, just to be perfectly honest, as we all can on this screen here. But other people can't, and they are being, vilified. They are being persecuted in ways that are now being validated, and they are losing essential services and civil rights. And it's a very serious situation. And I know it's not unique to that community, but since we're talking about that community, I do feel compelled to at least raise that to consciousness.
Thank you, Michael. And I think I don't want to stop this really important discussion, but I know, Rebecca, there are a couple questions from the audience that we want to make sure we address before we adjourn today.
Yeah, so our first question comes from Robbie, who is not only an FSU musical alum, but he also works in our development office. Yes. He asks, how might we be better participant citizens to foster a community in which neurodiversity is welcome? Any activities or groups we should be aware of to support or participate in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one group that I'm fond of, and Elizabeth, you might have other ideas, is the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, because this is an organization that is run and administered by autistic people, unlike a number of the other well-known advocacy groups. So ASAN, you might want to look that up. I know, Robbie, in the position that you're in development and other kinds of things. Part of the contribution would simply be to make community stakeholders aware of what's going on, to make community stakeholders aware of opportunities to support initiatives that help to leverage the opportunities and rights of neurodivergent people. And then also, within an organization, say with the College of Music, there's been a big uptick in the production of what are now called sensory-friendly concerts, film screenings. The film school could be involved with this. They're taking over that, what's the theater down there? The one I'm talking about, whatever it's called. Just to sort of, I know, in fact, there was an event, I can't remember where it was, like a week ago. I wasn't able to go, but it was a concert of, featuring all autistic musicians and artists. And I think it went along with an art exhibit. Matthew Cravener, who's one of my collaborators, performed at that concert. So yeah, the best thing that we can do, coming from the arts and humanities side, is to create spaces and leverage opportunities and bring forth voices of people. Because I know when I was running the Autism Ensemble, and we used to get out there and do concerts, and I can't count the number of people who came up to me and said, "Oh, wow, I thought autistic people were not social. I thought, they were all inward to themselves and had no empathy or sense of humor. And here you are with these kids, and they're funny and they're smart and they're creative and they're talented and they're social." And some of them are, this kid, and they're very different from one another. This little guy's a real ham, and this young woman over here is, she's more serious, and so you get to see that. You can read all the statistics you want about social emotional growth indicators and gains and this and that, and that's all important, but we have the opportunity to put the human face on it. I think of myself, say, with a project like Music and Autism book. I don't think of myself as an author. I think of myself in the role of a producer, like the producer of an album or the producer of a film. It's not my job to kind of represent these people. It's my job to represent them and to create platforms for them to present themselves. And there's a lot of good work going on in those ways. And some of the advocacy organizations, like the Flutie Foundation, is doing some really important work to advocate and promote autistic musical artists, like Jennifer Masumba, who I'm working with a lot these days. So yeah, those are some things. And Robbie, I'd be happy to follow up on that conversation with you.
We have one more question from Michael Strickland, commercial
Oh,
music faculty and parent.
Here. All right.
And parent of a 17-year-old with autism. Michael shares before his question, "I love how, with my son, autism and ADHD, music has offered such an incredible playground for creativity, social collaboration, and growth. He has also found a great environment for growth and development in sports as well, specifically soccer.
Mhm.
Are there ways in which we can learn interdisciplinary from sports psychology and education in regards to autism?"
I'm going to let the psychologist in the room take that one. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Thanks. Yeah, that's very much in my wheelhouse. Because that's actually what I've been working on recently, is looking at communities where autistic people are flourishing, thriving, and trying to figure out what we can learn from those communities. And you probably would be able to tell me a lot about what soccer has been doing for him in particular. But I would say, any group where there's a sense of shared endeavor, a sense where people are coming together to do something collectively, that has some element of enjoyment around it, some element of like, we are all here because we all want to make something happen together. Um, and I think those spaces work really well to build autistic community in a couple of different ways. One is that it takes a little bit of the pressure off of spontaneous social interaction, which is something that's difficult for a lot of people, and a lot of people on the spectrum in particular. So to have a space where there are more things that you can do with other people besides just make small talk. You are also kicking around a ball. You are also strategizing about plays. You are also supporting each other around victories or losses. There's a lot that's structured, conventionalized, about sports team interactions, and that can be helpful. And it also means that your social role in that group is not always contingent on like how much you can make every person like you. That is a hard pressure for, again, all of us to be under. But I think it weighs particularly hard on those who sometimes have a harder time finding their footing in social interactions or knowing how to really convey who they are in a way that other people will receive and welcome. So I think spaces like that, are really helpful. I think spaces that have an ethic of acceptance, a real strong commitment to, we are not going to kick you out unless you do something that hurts somebody else. Um, a lot of the kind of creative communities that I study have that kind of ethos, have that kind of quality, around them. And so, yeah, even thinking back, Michael, to your comment about sort of sensory friendly events, even for somebody who doesn't necessarily have the specific sensory sensitivities that an event like that would target or seek to accommodate, it's great just to come together with other people who might have those kinds of needs in a space where those kinds of needs are considered to be part of the artistic practice. Let's think about differences in sensory perception and how they relate to art making. I in Pittsburgh, we've got the Warhol Museum that does a lot of this kind of stuff in a very, very cool way that benefits everybody. But I think, especially, again, sort of thinking a little bit back to the last question, that there's a lot of this stuff for young people. There's a lot of kids' soccer teams. There's a lot of kids' music ensembles. And I think an area where we're really starting to see now the pressing need is these kinds of venues for adults. Where can adults, if you are an adult who wants to be in a rock band, if you are an adult who wants to find some people to play games with, to play board games with, or to LARP with, or to run a D&D campaign, or if you are an adult who would like to play soccer, how do you find and get connected with those spaces? So I feel like that's where a lot of the work remains to be done, is learning from youth communities, and from some of these kind of creative subcultures to create more opportunities for adults to come together in that kind of spirit of shared enjoyment.
Absolutely. Well, I will share one last comment from one of our viewers today. This is not a question, but I really wanted to share it with our speakers today. Diane McTaggart-Wall here again from Winter Springs. Thank you, Michael, for this presentation and pointing out how key listening is. My FSU graduate study in music therapy, class of 76, truly enhanced my listening skills. I look forward to reading more of your book.
Thank you,
This
Diane.
has been absolutely a phenomenal discussion. Thank you so much, Dr. Danielson, Dr. Fein, and of course, Dr. Bakan.
Thank you, Rebecca, for putting this together. It's been really
Thank you.
magical.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me to be a part of it.
Yes, and thank you everyone who tuned in today to hear us talk about this great work. I will be following up through email to offer you all a recording, as many of you have asked. We will make a recording available, and I will also share a link to Michael's book in that email as well. And if you need anything at all, just reach out to me. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.